Yeah, it's the latest episode of You Had to Be There. Delighted to be joined in studio with myself and Kathleen with the author Paul Howard, of course, creator of Russell Carroll Kelly as well. Paul, how are things?
Brilliant, really good. Yeah, great to be here.
This is it's stressed out a lot of our guests trying to pick 5 sporting events that they've seen
Paul
in person.
was 100% the most organised man. I asked him to do this weeks ago and literally straight away sent me the 5 picks with every single detail about them. I was so impressed. Normally you're hounding guests looking for these, but you were
I was waiting for the call, to be honest.
It's one of those lots of people enjoy. You're looking back at events that you've actually enjoyed.
This was my Desert Island Discs, for years. I listened to. I have my Desert Island Discs there ready, and I had my 5. You Had to Be Theirs ready as well.
Yeah. So there's no. Were there ones that haven't? We'll not spoil the 5 just yet, but were there ones just outside the 5 that you?
Well, Katie Taylor. I know everybody picks Katie Taylor, and I picked Katie Taylor, and it's the last time I cried.
Right. In London,
watching sport. I was in a bar in Belfast. I was in the Rock Bar on the Falls Road in Belfast, and I was at the Pubble Festival, and I was asked to read some Russell Carroll Kelly stories at the festival. And Katie Taylor's fight was at some point in the middle of my reading, and I was told beforehand, as soon as the fight starts, we're going to interrupt you. I'll put up my hand. Danny Morrison, who arranged the festival, he put up his hand to stop me from reading, and I had to go and sit down. They pulled the screen down, and we all watched the fight. And as soon as the fight was over, they put the national anthem on. Everybody sang our Ron Naveen.
Amazing.
And then they pulled the screen back up and went, away you go. And I did the second read. But the emotion of that, it's a long time since, because I wasn't a sports reporter anymore. I could actually be. Yes. I could kind of get invested in it.
Just enjoy it.
Her story, and where she'd come from, and how she'd. They'd created an Olympic sport because of this unstoppable force, this women's boxer, and I saw Deirdre Gogarty fight years earlier, and I think it was at the National Stadium. People got up and walked out because they couldn't sit and watch women boxing. So to see where Katie Taylor had taken it, it was very emotional for me.
Yeah, we had Deirdre Gogarty in studio here not too long ago. That week of Katie's fight, and she spoke very eloquently about it and how far women's boxing has come in particular. But that's an interesting point. Even when you work in sports media, you see something like Katie Taylor's fight, and you probably after the fight are analysing, how can we cover this? So you can enjoy the fight for what it is at the time, but you're also in the background thinking, how do we cover this? How do we should get her on, get her coach, or whatever.
And when you step away from it, as I did in 2005, you can actually enjoy matches as a fan, enjoy fights as a fan.
What a concept!
And be totally partisan for someone or against someone, and it's that was one of the most exciting things for me about. I mean, I hated giving up sports journalism because it was a job I loved, but there was, especially the first few years afterwards, I went, I can actually go to an Ireland football match, and boo,
if I want, exactly. No Liverpool Football Club appearances on this. On these 5, which I was surprised at. Very surprised at. Anyone who follows Paul on Twitter will know that Liverpool Football Club appears often enough. Yeah,
I didn't. I mean, there was lots of things involving Liverpool have moved me. Like the first, I started following Liverpool really because they won the 1977 European Cup final, and I was allowed to stay up late. So I kind of thought, I'll be a Liverpool fan because I can stay up late. And the following year they beat Bruges in the final, and right the way up to the final I was allowed to stay up late for every single match. So that's why I started following Liverpool. So those matches mean a lot to me, and obviously the Champions League finals since then, but it just so happened that I had 5 events that moved me more.
Even more so. Well, you have 5 strong picks. We'll get into them now. So we'll start in chronological order, I guess. 1989, the All-Ireland Senior Hurling Final at Croke Park. This is Tipperary against Antrim. Tip 424, Antrim 3 goals and 9 points, and Nicky English a performance, because Antrim scored 3-9, but Nicky English himself scored the exact same as them, 2-12, which kind of sums up his performance that day. Man of the match, undoubtedly.
Yeah, I had absolutely no interest or knowledge in hurling, none whatsoever. Growing up, it wasn't on my horizon at all. I was a football fan and that was it. But I went to Irish college, and I made a load of friends from Tipperary, and they were always talking about hurling. And I remember we were in Murriock in Kerry County Kerry, and we climbed up a mountain. Well, it's probably a hill in Kerry terms, but it felt like a mountain because it took us about an hour to get to the summit. And it was so we could get reception to listen to, it might have been a Munster hurling final or an All-Ireland semi-final. And I remember sitting with the lads, and I have a photograph of me with the lads sitting on the top of this hill listening to this match on the radio, which just seems like such an eternity.
Archaic, yeah.
So one of the lads, a guy called Tony McKenna, who is from Borrisacane in North Tip, he had a ticket for the All-Ireland final, which was wasted on me, absolutely wasted. The 1989 All-Ireland final. He said, "Do you want to come?" I said, yeah, I'd love to come. And I was on the hill. We were on the hill. He was with a bunch of his friends as well, and there was a crush on the hill.
Right.
And this was a few months after Hillsborough, so there was real worry. I mean, I was worried going to sports matches after Hillsborough.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of a crush on the hill. So we said, let's go down the canal end. And we moved down to the canal end. And we're standing there, and there's a crush there. And I don't know whether they opened the gates or whether we climbed the fence. I think we may have climbed over. But the stewards didn't stop us. We all got on the pitch. And I was behind the goal on the pitch. I mean, that seems inconceivable in this day and age, that they would allow fans to sit behind the goal. But I'm sitting there on the pitch with the lads.
For the match itself?
For the match, for most of the second half, actually. And if you can find it on the clip on YouTube, the incident I'm talking about now, you can see us all, the banks of fans behind the goal on the
like
pitch.
A school sports day.
Blocking out the advertising hoardings. And anyway, this particular, I was experimenting at the time with not wearing glasses. I was going through a sort of vain period in my life.
Thought it was cooler.
Yeah, I thought it was cooler not to have glasses. But the problem was I couldn't see. Like, I couldn't see anything, right?
Especially something like hurling as well.
Hurling, you're looking for the little schlitter. Yeah. Anyway, Aidan Ryan, and I know it was Aidan Ryan because I watched it back on YouTube, hit this diagonal pass across the field, probably 50 metres. It was unbelievable. But all I saw behind the goal was this blur in the distance and then this schlitter dropping. And Nicky English caught it. And it was cross body, caught it like, backhand.
Yeah.
I thought he caught it on the full, but I've watched it since and it bounced.
Right, half
and
volley.
He caught it and bang into the back of the net, and it was just that perfect, like the perfect golf swing or the perfect knockout punch. It's like whack.
Yeah.
You could hear it into the back of the net. The net. It's just sort of dream, a sort of dream goal. You want to see the net rustling and everything, and we ran onto the pitch, and I don't remember. I mean, I was from Dublin. I had no interest in hurling, but it was just like
you get kind of wrapped up in it.
Yeah.
I got when I watch riot scenes now on television, I think of that moment. Like, it was just all these lads with these sort of yellow and blue flat caps. They were in fashion at the time. They ran on the pitch, and I just sort of ran with them. And it was Nick English's second goal, I think, and it was the last meaningful moment of the match.
Yeah.
And it sort of crowned this performance. I mean, Antrim weren't in the match at all. It was a coronation rather than a sporting competition. But Nicky English, I mean, it was extraordinary what he did. Just to watch it fall and to catch it, I mean, Nicky English did that loads of times. But I mean, most hurlers must dream of scoring a goal like that.
Doesn't mean it's an easy skill though to do, because like you watched Nicky English, and he was slightly before my time. When you watch videos back, you're like, this guy was silky smooth and would look at home possibly in today's game as well. I know the game is completely different in many ways than it was. Yeah. But like, as you say, that second goal, the game was over. It was the biggest winning margin in the final apparently since Antrim's last final appearance, which had been 1943. And even Tipperary, I think it was 18 years since they'd won Liam McCarthy, so they were ending a famine. Yeah. But to do it in that style, and Nicky English.
And Nicky, like he was just ultra cool as well. Like, when I watched the clips back, like the 80s, because I'll be looking at the 1880s, it felt that remote from today. But he had that sort of Patrick Swayze from Ghost hair and everything. Like, his hair didn't seem to move. It was sort of perfectly parted.
Real green gel. Yeah. It was amazing. We'll move on to the next one. That was an extraordinary one. Tip fans, I think, will be right on board with the nostalgia for that one. This one's right up my alley as well. A bit of snooker for all of you snooker fans out there. This was Alex Higgins against Dennis Taylor. This is the Benson and Hedges Irish Masters. Even the fact that it's sponsored by a cigarette company is crazy to think of nowadays, but back then I guess that was the done thing. The Irish Masters at Goffs in Kildare 1990. Spoke to Ronnie O'Sullivan recently, and I can't remember if it was off air or on air, but he spoke so candidly about Goffs and how much the players loved Goffs as a venue. Just and you said it on air beforehand, how close the fans were to the actual arena and the table.
I mean, people who were there in Kildare, it was the heyday of snooker, and the venue was perfect because it was the old Bloodstock Arena, and it was round. The arena was round, and they just sort of put up this sort of wooden frame around in the middle and left enough room for the players to have a bit of elbow room, and then you were there, and you could, if you sneezed, it was no matter where you were in the arena, it was loud enough to make a player stop. There was no mobile phones in those days. I certainly didn't have one. But if you were terrified to shift in your chair in case it put the players off, and you could literally reach out and touch them. So the intimacy of I don't think I was ever at a sporting event that had that kind of intimacy, that you felt that close.
How big would the crowd have been?
Not big, maybe sort of 400, 500 people. So it was sort of small enough that, you could make eye contact with other fans and kind of go, it felt like when you go to a gig, when somebody does an unplugged gig for 400 people in Vicar Street, a big star, that's what it felt like. It felt like you were seeing these players who were used to big venues, but you were seeing them in a small venue, and it was an extraordinary. The Irish Masters was an extraordinary tournament, and it was just very much of its time.
I'd love to see it return because I never got the chance to see snooker at Goffs, but it's definitely one that was on my to-do list if it had stayed around. Alex Higgins and Dennis Taylor, you think, two Northern Irish snooker players, they must have gone on very well, but for people who don't know the backstory, these two lads didn't quite see eye to eye. We know Alex was a bit of a maverick and a character.
Yeah, I mean, they did at the start. I think when Alex Higgins went to England first to try to make it as a snooker player, Dennis Taylor set him up with a flat and rented him a television. Remember the days of renting televisions? Dennis Taylor rented a television for Alex Higgins to make this place a little more homely. So they were close at one point, but they fell out over the years. I think it was a personality thing. I think I mean, Alex Higgins at that point was, let's be honest, he was unhinged at that point, with the especially with the drink and the, whatever else. We were seeing the end of Alex Higgins, really, and it was really, really sad in those years to witness it, but it was compelling as well because you never knew what he was going to do. He had this hyperactive energy about him. He was one of the few people I ever saw who could walk into a room and immediately change the energy of the room just by walking in, and it wasn't usually dark for the energy. Best. People went quiet when he walked into a room. I remember years later Liam Gallagher walking into a room, and I kind of felt the same energy from Liam Gallagher in that stage.
Unpredictability, isn't it? You don't know what they're going to do.
The unpredictability, it was the hyperactivity, the one word from this man and it could all kick off. That's what you felt about Higgins. And before, in March 1990, Dennis Taylor and Alex Higgins had played together on the Northern Ireland World Cup team. There was a World Cup tournament in March. And there was a row about, at the time they said it was about prize money, but I think it was more than that. I think, Taylor wanted to hog the table, Higgins wanted to hog the table, and Taylor was saying, well, this is my match, and Higgins said, no, I'm gonna go and make up for my loss in the last match. And anyway, they lost, and there was a huge row, and during the course of the row, the troubles had never ever come up between them. Both Taylor and Higgins had left Northern Ireland before the start of what we know as the modern Troubles. So it had never really been an issue between them. And Higgins said, the next time you go back to Northern Ireland, I'm going to have you shot. And Higgins was from Sandy Row, and Dennis Taylor was from Coal Island. And I had never really thought about their religious affiliations before. I actually, my own prejudices, I thought it was the other way around.
Yeah, sorry, and you're all right. Because a name like Taylor, we were even saying this morning, you'd think was of a Protestant
completely
background, but not.
Yeah, and then and Higgins, I just presumed he was anyway.
Yeah.
But so it never came up as an issue until this, and it all blew up. It was all over the papers, and the following week they ended up in the quarterfinal together at the Benson Hedges Irish Masters in Goffs, and I went with a friend of mine. And again, it's the closeness, it's the intimacy, the tension. I don't remember a single thing about the match. I don't remember a shot. I don't remember a break. I had to check the score. I had to go online to find out that Dennis Taylor won 5-2.
5-2, yeah.
So you were saying to me that you had a headache for about 2 days afterwards, just because you were concentrating so much on the moment.
I had this migraine, and like I said to you, you're sitting there and you're trying not to move anyway. Like if you're at a football match or a rugby match, you're up and down and all the rest. But snooker, you're frozen in the seat like that, and you're tensing the whole time. But this was a tension I'd never ever experienced. I was there as a fan, and I got this migraine right the way across my shoulders and neck. I never ever get migraines, but it was from just the tension
and the build up to the match as well, the backdrop to the match, I suppose.
The fact that they both hated each other. You could smell it in the air. It was, the atmosphere. It was so dark. It was amazing, but it was amazing to be there. It was probably 400 or 500 people there.
Yeah.
And
how did they interact with each other in the moment?
Well, that's the amazing thing, because that's all any of us watched, and they because none of us watched the snooker. We just watched it. It was like people watching, and you're looking at they didn't look at each other at all. They did. Alex Higgins especially just refused to make eye contact, and Dennis Taylor, there was a bit of that sort of challenging stare going on, but Higgins just didn't make eye contact at all. And the other great thing about Goffs was you'd sort of spill out into a corridor and you'd find yourself backstage with players.
Security was high, obviously.
The security was non-existent, and it was a brilliant event. But that match in particular, I'll never forget it. It's just the most stressed I've ever been, the most worked up I've ever been. And there was a little bit of me was pulling for Higgins, because if you're sports fans generally love a comeback story, and that would have been such a great comeback story. But what I didn't realise at the end was that I was witnessing kind of end stage Higgins.
Demise.
He was never the same after that. He got banned for threatening Dennis Taylor and assaulting a press officer, and he never came back again. He was kind of a sad case after that. It was really awful to watch.
Yeah, big time. I think Ken Doherty told the story about working as an usher at Goffs when he was a kid, and Alex Higgins came up to him before a match and said, if I ask you for an orange juice, I mean vodka orange juice, and if I ask you for a vodka orange, that means double. So I think he wrote that story in his book, but it's just brilliant. Like Higgins probably throughout the match drinking these vodka orange juices. It was a great pick. Definitely that's an event that only 400 people can say they were at it, but no doubt there's probably 4,000 or 40,000 out there who say they were.
Like all the greats.
Exactly. The next pick, Paul, is another brilliant one. Steve Collins versus Chris Eubank. This is at Mill Street in Cork in 1995 for the WBO middleweight and super middleweight titles. A really famous event. You think of the Páirc Uí Chaoimh fight later the year, but the Mill Street one was just
Mill Street was it. Mill Street was it, because it just had everything going for it. Like, it was Paddy's weekend. It was the 18th of March. It was in the Green Glens Arena in Mill Street where the Eurovision had happened. The idea that this fight wouldn't be in London, that it would be in this remote part of Ireland, it was the circumstances behind it were bizarre. Steve Collins he'd want to fight Eubank for years, and I think Eubank was kind of avoiding him because Steve was in that what they call in boxing the who needs him class, in that he's going to give you a really, really good fight and there's nothing in it for you. There's no money in it. Like, Steve really wasn't a big draw, and there's a chance he could beat you. So I think Eubank had avoided him, but Eubank had fought Ray Close twice, two really, really controversial fights, because like a lot of Eubank fights in that period, they were really close and he got the decision, and at least
often
one of
12 rounds as well.
At least one of them I thought Close beat him. And so Close was awarded a third fight just off the back of how controversial these previous two the decisions were. And then Ray Close, there was a problem with a brain scan, and Steve was offered the fight in January, very late.
2 months out, literally.
2 months out. And I was I was working with Steve on a book at the time, and I'd spent probably the previous year, I'd probably spent 3 or 4 months with him in Romford in Essex. And Steve had this idea. He wanted to do a book like Eamon Dunphy's Only a Game, where it was kind of a year in the life of a professional boxer. And the start of the book, he beat Chris Pyatt to win the WBO middleweight title. And that was the start of the book. And then the book was going nowhere. Pyatt was a real sort of so what kind of moment, because it was a world title, but no one really rated Chris Pyatt in world terms. And then Steve was trying to defend the title, and we went to Hong Kong in October of 94, and the fight got called off the day beforehand because the fighters' purses weren't paid. And then his fight was rescheduled against an American called Lonnie Beasley. It was rescheduled for Boston in December, and Steve got sick. Got a throat infection, so it was called off again. So this was the book. The book was in ruins. And then in January, Steve rang me and said, I've been offered the Eubank. So suddenly,
a twist on the book.
Yeah, and so it suddenly. So I was personally
all the stuff that came
excited.
Before kind of made it more of a story as well.
Yeah, and I was personally excited. I was like this is the book now, So the fight itself, Steve disappeared for about 6 weeks, and I think this is why there was all this intrigue around the fight. Steve disappeared to one of the Canary Islands with Tony Quinn, of Tony Quinn Health Foods Shops, and who was practicing hypnotism at the time, and we had all these kind of relaxation tapes and everything, and Steve disappeared off with him, and there was no contact with anybody. I mean, I know Roddy. I did Roddy Collins, his brother Roddy's book as well, and Roddy said I had no contact with him at all while he was away, and he came back, and he was like, Steve was a basket case when he went away. Like, he was physically broken down. He kept getting colds, and his head wasn't in it and everything. And Tony Quinn, whatever he did, remade him out there, but they came back, and there was this story doing the rounds that Tony Quinn had hypnotized him so he wouldn't feel pain, right, in the ring. And this was really serious. And Chris Eubank got really, really spooked by it, because pain is your body's way of saying the fight's over.
I'm out,
And Eubank had experience in the ring where he fought Michael Watson, and Michael Watson had ended up with life-changing injuries from this fight, from this knockout punch that Chris Eubank pulled from nowhere at the end of the fight, which he was losing. And then a few weeks before this Collins Eubank fight, Nigel Benn had fought Gerald McClellan, and Gerald McClellan ended up with life-changing injuries as well. So boxers and injuries in the ring was very much in the news when Steve arrived back and said, I'm not going to feel any pain. And I think it really, really spooked Chris Eubank. The fight turned, Steve Collins fought brilliantly, which I was expecting, because I'd been following his career right from the start. He'd fought some of the toughest boxers in America, like Mike McCallum, Paul McPeak, Kevin Thornton. He'd done his apprenticeship, and this was his moment. But Steve put Eubank down in the 8th round with a body shot, and Eubank got back up, but he looked beaten. He was gone. And then the fight turned on this moment in the 10th round, where Eubank came out at the very, very start of the round, walked across the ring, and nailed Collins with a right. I mean, it was an unbelievable punch, which Eubank was always capable of. That's what made the fight so exciting, that Eubank could be battered and still pull out a fight-winning punch. He did it against Watson. He did it against Nigel Benn. Collins went down. He got up. I mean, he looked okay, but that's the moment to charge in and finish a fight, when a fighter's hurt. And Eubank didn't. He stood back and he started dancing. And that was always a thing. People always said Eubank had because of firstly the Watson fight, but then later on watching what happened with Gerald McClellan, he'd kind of lost his appetite for that kind of destruction, that thing that requires you to rush in all fists blazing and finish a fight. He just couldn't do it. And Roddy and I, we argue all the time about this. Roddy reckons that Eubank knew he'd hit Steve with his toughest punch, it was hardest punch, and Steve still got up.
Yeah,
and that's why he stood back.
Worked, yeah.
I personally, I think he just didn't have it in him anymore. But anyway, it was an amazing occasion, especially because I was writing the book and I thought, now we have a book.
Hallelujah.
What I remember about it was, apart from being Paddy's weekend, the Gardaí were the security on the night. So if you look at pictures from the fight, it's just guards everywhere. Like when Steve was walking to the ring, he's surrounded by about 300 Gardaí. It's like he's going to court. Yeah. But the other thing I remember is that most of Dublin's gangland criminals were there as well, you know. Right. So there's this kind of uneasy mix of law and order and criminals in the audience. It was crackling the atmosphere down there, you know. The second fight at Páirc Uí Chaoimh in September, it wasn't a great fight. It was, and it definitely didn't have that atmosphere. Remember at this point when Steve fought Eubank in that first fight, Eubank had never been beaten before. And he was Barry Hearn's darling, even though Steve was managed by Barry Hearn as well. But he was Sky Sports' darling as well. Like he was the first £1 million a fight fighter in England, and unbeaten. And a lot of the fights, it was kind of felt that, you know, he should have lost that one, yes. But he always seemed to get the benefit of the doubt.
Everything about that pick is amazing. You've got the guards, you've got the Paddy's weekend, the hypnotism. I mean, just the venue in Mill Street as well. It's just one of those. The
Walkman as well. Steve was sitting in his corner before the fight with like what the Walkman headphones, and I don't mean the Beats, you know, those big ones, or even the little buds that they have now. He had like orange. Do you remember the ones which are little Sony Walkman? Like they were sort of orange foam headphones, and the hood over them. You know, it was amazing. Like, you know, especially the drama around it really contributed to it.
We're bang out of time, but we've got two picks, and maybe there's one of them you have more graw for than the other, but two Cork picks. Sonia O'Sullivan Olympic 5,000 metre final in Sydney in 2000, and of course Roy Keane's performance against the Dutch in that World Cup qualifier in Lansdowne in Dublin in 2001. Are there either of these that stands out more so than the other for you?
Well, I think Sonia, that was my first Olympics, and when you want to become a sports journalist, it's usually because something has moved you in your childhood, and for me it was the Olympics. I always wanted to go to from the time I watched the 1980 Olympics and the 84 Olympics on television, I wanted to be a sports journalist. So Sydney 2000 was my first Olympics. I remember being at the opening ceremony, and you know, 110,000 people in this incredible stadium in Sydney, and John Williamson singing Waltzing Matilda, and everybody singing along, and I was in tears, you know, and it was amazing. But that night in the stadium, Sonia, I mean, I'd followed Sonia's career, you know, which was, she always looked so assured until 1996, and then she became a totally different athlete. You never knew. She was unbeatable up between 92 and 96, and then after the Olympics in Athens, from that point on, she, you know, obviously, you know, she was disappointed at the Olympics in Athens, or in Atlanta. It was a disaster for her. And then 97, I would cover the World Championships in Athens, and it was exactly the same. You kind of thought she's finished, and then she came back and she won the World Cross Country Championships, the double, in 2000. But we still didn't know going to Sydney. Her form was up and down all that summer. We didn't know where she was, and she won silver. I mean, I think it should have been bronze. I think it should have been gold. Gabriela Szabo, who won the race, there's always going to be a shadow over Szabo. And in my mind, there's always an asterisk against Szabo's name, because she retired from athletics 3 years later after this scandal in which Actavegan, this drug that's very similar to EPO, was found in the boot of her car, which was being driven across the French border, where she had her training camp in France, and border police stopped the car and found this Actavegan, and a teammate of hers said it said it's mine. It's not for Gabriela Szabó. But there will always be a question mark over Szabó. So in my mind, Sonia won gold. But it was an extraordinary performance from her.
Yeah, quite incredible. We've no time literally for the last pick with Roy Keane, but I guess the Overmars tackle setting the scene that day just led to. It's been in a few of our choices, to be fair. I think Roy Keane and Katie Taylor have been the two that have appeared most often. Which is fair
I think
enough.
If you were there at Lansdowne Road that day, that's the moment. Even more so than the 2002 World Cup for me.
Yes,
that was the moment, beating Holland, because it wasn't our usual 1-1 draw. We didn't win 1-1 like we usually did. We beat Holland.
Finally
won
10
men.
Yeah, exactly. Great picks, Paul. One of my favourite episodes, I think. To be fair, it's just incredible, and the fact you had a snooker one in there as well, just right up my own street. Fantastic, really good stuff. That is Paul Howard's version of You Had to Be There.